Deray, always good to have you. First of all, let's start with these massive crowds that we've been seeing over the last 7 or 8 days in cities all over the country, all 50 states now, in the wake of George Floyd's death. These protests seem to me at least, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, they seem larger. They seem more sustained. The crowds seem more diverse than what we've seen in instances past. Why do you think that is?
I think that it has reached a boiling point because we were promised things in 2014 that didn't come to pass. You know, in 2014, we saw the protests. Remember, we were in the street in Ferguson for 400 days, but since then, the police have killed more people, not less. A third of all the people killed by strangers actually killed by a police officer in the United States, and this is explicitly about race. It makes sense that this popped off in Minneapolis this time. You know why? Because in Minneapolis, a black person is 13 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white person. It's actually the single biggest racial disparity with regard to police violence in the country. In March and April of 2020, the police killed as many people as they did in March and April of 2019. COVID, quarantine, lockdown didn't change anything about the terror of the police. I think what you see in the street is people being fed up. We have not seen local leaders have the courage to stand up to the police. It's one of the reasons why we are advocating in the short term to make sure that there are these 8 simple policy solutions around use of force. You can find them at 8can'twait.org, and it's really common sense things like banning chokeholds, requiring de-escalation, requiring a duty to intervene if an officer sees another officer do something bad. But Craig, let me tell you, only 28 of the 100 largest police departments even ban chokeholds today. New York City doesn't. Minneapolis doesn't. St. Paul doesn't. Like, mayors can change these things immediately, but we've never seen that courage.
You know, speaking of chokeholds specifically, I talked to former New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton last night, and he was surprised that chokeholds are still perfectly legal in a number of states in this country in 2020. And you have to wonder, to your point, Deray, how can that be? What's the justification?
Yeah, and remember, there's a difference between chokehold and stranglehold. So they will policies. There are a lot of policies that actually ban chokeholds and don't ban strangleholds. You might wonder what's the difference. A chokehold is the restriction of your airway. A stranglehold is the muscles around your neck that restrict blood flow. There are places like New York City that has banned chokeholds in the past, but with Garner, for instance, strangleholds weren't banned. So they have always maintained that they did not choke Eric Garner, but they strangled him, as if somehow that is better. But, you know, I think one of the things about policies like this is that the public, there are a lot of people who don't feel smart enough to understand policy. They feel like this has to be something that, like, people get that they don't really understand, that they can't understand. And that's just not true. You know, if you go to 8can'twait.org, you can see all the 8 policies that really do change the game. When police departments go from 0 of these policies to all 8, there's a 72% reduction in police violence. We're pressing for cities across the country to adopt all 8 immediately. There are 2 cities in the country right now that have, so San Francisco and Tucson, Arizona. And then there are a lot of cities that are somewhere in between. But Craig, these are common sense things. It's not sort of a wild notion to say an officer should give a verbal warning before they shoot. It's not a wild idea to say that the officer should have to report every time they point a gun at somebody or threaten to. If I just point a gun at people, that's aggravated assault. If I point a gun at somebody, that might be attempted murder in some places. When the police do it, they don't even report that. Like, these are simple, but not small. These things are things that everybody can understand, but the impact is actually huge.
You know, I came to know you in Ferguson, and one of the things that came out of that was, of course, Black Lives Matter and some other groups. And these sustained protests that we've seen for more than a week now, something that's striking, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong, there doesn't seem to be one group that's leading this. There's not a leader that's emerged from this moment. Is that the case? And if so, why? And what does that say about what we're seeing?
Well, the beautiful thing about this moment is that there are leaders all across the country in cities at every level, at the local, state, and national level, fighting for these changes. So I've been in contact with so many people in cities who are leading the charge. But the reality is that in 2014, there wasn't one organization leading the movement either, right? That we saw it was a little more localized, that Ferguson was really the flashpoint. Ferguson was a phenomenon. We were in the street for 400 days. Then there was a Baltimore. Then there was Sandra Bland. There was Walter Scott. There was Freddie Gray. So we saw these spread, but this moment is different in the sense that they have become national very quickly. And I think people are fed up. So I think it is actually a strength of the movement that there's so many leaders all across the country. And remember, when we zoom out and think about what the solutions are, the first bucket is reduce the power of the police. So that's things like use of force policies and police union contracts. But the second power is we want to shrink the role of the police. Only 5% of the arrests that happen in the country are arrests for violent crime. Craig, people think that most of the arrests are for violent crime in the country. It's 5%. That's an FBI number. And that's been 5% for over 20 years. We don't need somebody with a gun to go find missing kids or go to car crashes or go to mental health crises. We need experts to do that. We need to shift those responsibilities and shift those resources, move the money away from policing and move the responsibilities. We need to shrink the role of the police. And that isn't even a wild notion either. So reduce the power of the police, shrink the role, and that'll actually get us to a place where we think about safety beyond policing.